Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us. My name is Gordon Gray. I'm the Kuwait Professor of Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Affairs here at the Elliott School. And I want to thank all of you for joining the third Middle East Policy Forum event of the calendar year. And I want to thank Christian, who's there, and Logan, who's somewhere doing in the very back, doing hard work for putting this all together. And in addition to many of my students, we also have 2 faculty members and 22 students from Kent State University. So I want to welcome all of you. Thanks for coming. They're in Washington anyway. They didn't fly out just for this event, but I'm sure they'll say it was where they would have if they'd known. Before we turn to today's topic, I want to let you know about our next Middle East Policy Forum event. It'll be 3 weeks from today, which is Wednesday, March 18th. Karen Elliott House will discuss her new biography of the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Read the book, it's really good, and she's a real expert on Saudi Arabia. So if you're free, I highly recommend it. Turning to what we're going to be talking about today, I had the very good fortune of working with Ambassador James Jeffrey in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, or for the 3 of us who served in that bureau in this room, the Mother Bureau, as we used to call it. I always appreciated Ambassador Jeffrey's ability to get to the heart of the issue very quickly, his ability to identify what the core U.S. interests were. But given the number of crises we seem to navigate, I also appreciated his sense of humor. It made it go a lot easier. Ambassador Jeffrey's written a very compelling memoir, which I highly recommend you pick up a copy. It's also available hardback, paperback, and as an ebook. Just a little background on him. He served in the U.S. Army for 7 years, including as an infantry officer in Vietnam. He was a foreign service officer for 35 years, including ambassadorships to Albania, Iraq, and Turkey. He was Deputy National Security Advisor in the second term of the Bush 43 administration. And he returned to government in the first Trump administration to work as the special representative for Syria. He was promoted to the rank of career ambassador, which is the highest rank in the Foreign Service. It's equivalent to a 4-star general. And equally notably, maybe even more important, he taught here at the Elliott School for 6 years. So thanks so much for joining us, and over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gordon. What I would like to do for the first part, but I'm not so sure it's technically going to work, is, can you all hear me? Okay, so I can stand and talk rather than use the mic. Is that okay? Okay. First of all, I want to thank Gordon for putting this together and for what he's doing for the school and for what I hope is the next generation of foreign service professionals. Gordon was always our idea of what we wanted to be as a foreign service officer and eventually an ambassador. It's not just that he looks the part, he plays and acts the part. He did an extraordinary job in Tunisia at a very difficult time during the Arab Spring, and we really enjoyed working with him. Okay, the book I wrote not as an autobiography, although there's a lot of autobiographical elements in it, but frankly, I'm not distinguished enough to have my own autobiography, but rather to emphasize 4 separate themes. 1, the importance of what the United States is doing around the world for the last 80 years, its consistency and its effect on not only us here in America, but people around the world. 2, the role of presidents and all of that, including in dealing with ambassadors. 3, how we use this awful word, interagency. How many of you have heard the word interagency? If I could strike it from the vocabulary, I would, but I can't. So it's there, and we're stuck with it. And finally, foreign service officers and what it's like in this profession. Again, I give you Gordon Gray as a really good example of that. I also want to thank all of you not only for being here today, but also for studying foreign affairs. There's no more important profession. There's no more rewarding profession. Okay.
For the online audience.
Sure. Oh, that's right. Okay. So first, foreign policy. The United States, after World War II, decided, it took several tries, beginning with the UN, but finally decided that it would run a global collective security system based upon containment of the threats to the world island, Eurasia, at that time by communist Soviet Union, soon communist China. And that has been our policy ever since then. It is in black and white in the Trump administration's national security strategy, where it talks about ensuring that no one state or alliance of states dominates, it uses that word, Eurasia. And that has been our policy. It's a collective security, defensive policy by, with, and through our partners, of which we've got 80 and 90 around the world. And the important thing is it has worked. Now, anybody who reads the news over the last, well, my entire adult life, sees one crisis, war, or neo-war after another. But compare the period from 1945 on to today to 1914, 1945. That's the comparison you need to make. A world destroying itself, ultimately with 2 atomic bombs dropped. We have avoided that awful situation now for 80 years, and not all of it, but much of it is because of the collective security system and the broad globalization that accompanies that the United States has played a central role with a lot of other countries working with us in carrying out. And it is very, very important in my mind that we keep this up. 2, the Middle East is a crucial part of that region. This was best said by, of all people, Barack Obama in 2015, the General Assembly. 1, its energy resources and supplies are critical to the world economy, period. They determine, because oil prices are fungible, the price of the gas pump in America, regardless of how much oil we here in America pump, generally speaking. Things that are bad in the region don't stay in the region, from terrorism to weapons of mass destruction. You've got various choke points, as we just saw with the Houthis in the Red Sea, but you've got the Dardanelles, you've got the Suez, you've got the Straits of Hormuz. These are crucial for international trade, which is crucial for our prosperity and, to some degree, our peace. And finally, allies and partners. The whole collective security system, from Korea, I used to say arcing around to Iceland, but now I guess I have to add Greenland, is part of a perimeter. And every part of it has to be defended, or no part of it will feel secure. People get really nervous, and if you're an American diplomat, you are the recipient of that nervousness, regardless of almost anywhere you serve. So the Middle East is important. It has differed, as I try to spell out in the book, from East Asia and Western Europe, because the security problems there, with some exceptions in East Asia in internal uprisings, were binary, a major state threatening the whole region from the outside, China, East Asia, Soviet Union, Europe. In the Middle East, while there was some of that, particularly from the Soviet Union, the real problem has been internal discord, animosities, dysfunctionalities, and other problems that make the region incapable of defending itself, are contributing to a common defense the way East Asia and Europe has been. So therefore, we have a lot more hands-on engagement in the Middle East, and the book covers at least one officer's experience doing that. Presidents. First of all, every president that I've dealt with, and that's 4 of them, although with Joe Biden it was mainly as vice president, really best for America. Secondly, and they have very different ways of approaching it. It's a tough job, and there's a formal way to advise them and support them that the bureaucracy sets up. But to one or another degree, they listen to their own gut. They listen to their wife in the middle of the night. They listen to some friend from college. They listen to some business partner. They listen to their nephew, you know who I'm talking about here, or not nephew, their son-in-law. And you get a very broad range of policy responses. What I will say is, in the case of Biden, Bush 43, and Obama, they would listen to the people in the field, be they ambassadors, be they military. In the case of Trump, I didn't have the same direct access, but he would listen to Secretary Pompeo, and Pompeo would listen to us. So it was essentially the same thing, it just had a cutout. But this is extremely important because only one person in the United States makes policy, the president. He or she has to make it in response to our allies and partners, the situation around the world, the state of Congress, which has a huge impact on foreign policy, not just funding, but beginning with funding, and American public opinion. But in the end, they make their own decisions and they have to live with them. And you can get in trouble as a president in foreign policy. I thought that President Biden's foreign policy all in all was very good, but he never recovered from a disastrous execution of a perfectly reasonable withdrawal from Afghanistan. The withdrawal was fine. We'd spent 20 years there. My son was deployed there 3 times with the State Department, endangering his life every time. It was time to go. We shouldn't have gone that way, and that hurt President Biden in a way that he couldn't recover from. As I tell Foreign Service officers, hey, you're lucky. You're the only bureaucrats buried in the bureaucracy in the U.S. government that can destroy presidencies, mainly by letting your embassy or diplomatic establishment get overrun. Okay? Tet 68, our Saigon embassy. Again, Saigon in 1975, when Graham Martin wouldn't pull out in time. Obviously, Beirut, 1983. Obviously, Benghazi in 2012. And then, of course, again, Kabul in 2021. We have it in our hands to really make life miserable for presidents, and presidents are kind of aware of that, and therefore they give us and our concerns a lot of attention, as they should. Okay, how does this all work? Again, the book describes how we work with the military. To some degree, I had to be careful, the intelligence community, but they're there behind the scenes and everything. We just can't talk so openly about it. And various economic actors in the U.S. government, besides the private sector, that's very important. It's USTR, the trade people. It's the Department of Commerce, and very importantly, the Department of Treasury. They're very, very important foreign policy players. And of course, USAID, now it is gone, but its functions were very, very important to everything we were doing. The military calls this DIME, diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Well, the first problem with that is that it's the military deciding how we organize policy. And that, sadly, is something we've had ever since the 1970s. And there are reasons for it. If you look at American foreign policy in the first 20 years, when we put together this global collective security and broader economic, political, all elements of government system with our partners and allies, all you see is State Department people. George Kennan, Paul Nitze, obviously Dean Acheson, General Marshall as Secretary of State. He went on to be Secretary of Defense, but it was not particularly noteworthy. And of course, in the Eisenhower administration, Dulles. They were the people who determined foreign policy. Then in the 60s rather, McNamara in the White House started playing a role. And under Dean Rusk, the State Department started fading in with William Fulbright, and the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many years, who had a totally different view of what our foreign policy should be, and imposed that view on generations of State Department officials because, look, they're the guys who own our budget. They're the guys who pass our legislation, so it's very important to please them. So the military has gained as the thinkers of how we do national security, and that's unfortunate because diplomacy is not just what we do in the field, from issuing visas to working with the military on assistance programs or working with the trade people on trade agreements. And we do all of that, and it's important, and some of it's laid out in the book. It's the coordination of foreign policy. Somebody has to do that. Clausewitz said correctly that war, by that he meant military force, is the continuation of politics by other means. Okay, because it's other means, he wrote a 2-volume book on it, because the other means, trust me, are very complicated, but there's simply another way of doing the continuation of policy. So that means somebody other than the military, because they're busy doing the other means, has to do the continuation of policy and fit the military into everything else. From my standpoint, the best line in my book is, armies don't wage wars, political systems wage wars. And political systems need somebody to support the president, the ultimate wager of war, in deciding what the objectives are and how to do it. And much of that befalls the people in key roles in the National Security Council and in the State Department, many of whom are career Foreign Service officers, at least up until the last couple of administrations, and again, up until this administration in the field were usually Foreign Service officers. So there was a real back and forth between the top levels of government and their diplomats in the field and folks in the State Department and obviously in the National Security Council to figure out how to pull this all together. Finally, I want to say a few words about being a Foreign Service officer. It's the best profession that I could possibly imagine, and I've worked in the business world and I've worked in the military. It is every day a challenge if you do the job right. It's every day something new. You get to face situations, at times dangerous, at times very demanding intellectually. You get to face people of very different perspectives, and that is really good for us. You have to get out of your own little silo and put yourself in the shoes of the person sitting across from you, because that person, trust me, will have a different view. This is something I didn't write because I would have gotten in trouble about it, but it's something that I realized every day, not only as an American diplomat, but also as an American husband, and thus a member of German, and thus a member of a German family. The whole world falls into two kinds of people in one sense. We Americans and everybody else, because the power differential between us and everybody else is so great. The Germans used to on every American presidential election, we Germans should vote because it's more important to us than it is to you who's the American president. And in a way, they were right. And that is as much a burden as it is a benefit to us in the diplomatic business, because it means we have to always keep in mind that a president who decides, okay, I'm going to pull my troops out of, well, in the case that I had to deal with repeatedly, Syria, that has a minor impact. We're talking about 1,000 troops, maybe a minor impact on America. It has a huge impact on those people. Same thing with tariffs, if you will, same thing with trade deals, same thing with whether we're going to support a country or not support a country. In 1956, our two closest allies, France and Britain, went into Suez, essentially to try to recreate part of their colonial empire, at least temporarily, and push back on the then leader of Egypt. It was Nasser by that time, wasn't it? And so this didn't fit in our scheme of things. And with a few words, President Eisenhower made clear after the Soviets threatened to use nuclear weapons against the French and the British, you're not covered by NATO in Egypt. We won't support you, and we're going to start rethinking our trade agreements with you. And immediately, these two powerful countries stopped doing this. So this kind of power is important, but it has to be used wisely. And that's one of the reasons you have professional diplomats. I'll stop there. And Gordon, over to you. And now I'll take my seat.
Well, thanks. Thanks, first of all, for your overly kind words, but also thanks for your talk. I'll start with a softball question, and then I'll leave it to the audience to ask you the tough questions. But my softball question is, why did you decide to write this book?
Um, I was busy doing two jobs in the State Department. I was a special envoy for Syria, and I was the special envoy for the Defeat ISIS coalition. Fortunately, 90% of the activity in both countries were in Syria, so they broadly overlapped. But then COVID hit, and as you remember, we couldn't go to the office. So I had some time at home, and I said, what should I do with this? And I had written two books. I had written what amounted to a book as a honors thesis in college on Anglo-American policy during the Korean War, which piqued my interest in foreign policy, and particularly foreign policy in the security realm. And then I'd written a book on how America treated the Vietnam War and those of us who served in it, which was far too controversial to ever even try to get published, because I thought that a lot of people who I was working with wouldn't like what I was writing about them, beginning with Bill Clinton and Secretary Kerry. So I didn't publish that, but I decided, okay, I'll try a third time. And I started with an autobiography, and I was told nobody wants an autobiography, so find a theme. So the theme is Middle East crises and how we worked through them from about 2000 to my service from 2018 to end of 2020 back in the State Department. But I stick in some comments from the time since then as well.
Thanks. Over to you all. If I can ask you to identify yourselves and to remember that questions end with a question mark, or they should at least. Yeah. Go.
Thank you so much. I'm Jo Spear. I'm a professor here at the Elliott School. Thank you very much for your service. I am wondering how you are looking at Syria today, and if you are in any way hopeful about the situation in Syria today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for the question. I'm giddy about Syria today. 2 weeks ago, I testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Syria, and I'll repeat my bottom line, which is Syria is, assuming we slowly stumble forward on Gaza phase 2, Syria is the most important, and we don't get into a war with Iran over the nuclear count, both of which I think are highly possible that we won't. So therefore, Syria is the most important issue in the foreign affairs field in the Middle East at this time. Why? Because of what has happened over the last 2 years. Much of the focus in the news, and certainly the political trauma in America, plus and against, has been on the Gaza population, understandably, in the Israeli campaign in Gaza. But what we've basically seen is a region-wide campaign against Iran and its proxies, led by, at various times, Israel, the United States, Arab states, and Turkey, particularly in Syria, playing a role. And when the dust is settled, Iran has emerged as a tremendously weakened loser. And this is very important because in my experiences, and I described some of them, including how Condoleezza Rice called the Israelis in 2006 and said, okay, stop your attack into Lebanon. You're getting in the way of our larger foreign policy interests in the region. We ignored the rise of Iran over 20 years. How did a country that had the Arab states, the United States, Israel, and Turkey, look at the power imbalance, how was it able to set up under our eyes a regional proxy network, proceed with thousands of long-range ballistic missiles, and a pretty sophisticated nuclear program, including, as the Israelis now have the evidence, although we knew as early as 2007, a sophisticated weaponization program? The answer is twofold. First of all, we got diverted into other things, you name it. Saddam Hussein, Al-Qaeda, and 9/11, the Arab Spring, the Palestinian-Israeli issue, which dominated thinking in my bureau and Gordon's bureau, for many years up until Trump and Biden didn't show much interest in it. But even Obama started to, and then Kerry decided that this was going to be his legacy. So through the Obama administration, that also was dominant. The other thing is that we had this mantra: you can negotiate with Iran because, in response to Henry Kissinger's famous question or famous query, is Iran a state or a movement? The assumption was, in the end, they can be a state like all other states and act like states and want to have Silicon Valley and good trade relations with us and peace and a happy population. So we can negotiate with them, but we can't use military force against them because they have what we called escalation dominance. Not that they had more weapons or more troops or anything, but they could take pain and would go down that route more quickly than we or any of our allies, including the Israelis. The Israelis bought into this. And what we saw, I think, well before 2023 was that you really can't negotiate with the Iranians. And we'll see what Trump gets out of this latest negotiation. I'm willing to bet it will not be the end of enrichment, which is the key thing if Iran wants to signal it's a state and not a revolutionary movement. And we did see that you could defeat it militarily, that we did have escalation dominance, most prominently in blowing the hell out of Fodro. So Syria now is the most important place to solidify that change in the region. That's my view. It's the view of the former CENTCOM commander and the current CENTCOM commander, and that's why they're putting so much effort into it. Now, it is extremely difficult to sort out a country that has gone through 11 years of war. I had a similar problem when I was deployed to Iraq in 2004, and there's all kinds of war stories in there about how difficult that is, and it's equally difficult in Syria. As long as the entire international community is rooting for this government while also putting pressure on this government to treat its minorities, beginning with the Kurds and the Druze, but also the Alawites, in a decent manner, and keep the Iranians out and keep the Islamic State remnants down, it'll be okay. It'll be ugly. It'll cost us a lot of money. It'll be a lot of turmoil. It'll keep people in my profession busy, but we can do this. It's when we're divided that there's a problem. My other expression, other than that I like to pitch about, other than armies don't fight wars, political systems do, is that you can't fight an insurgency if one of the neighbors is not on board. We saw that in Afghanistan with Pakistan. We saw that in Iraq with both Syria, Assad Syria, and Iran. And we saw it in Vietnam, obviously, and a few other places. So if everybody, and that's where we are right now, everybody more or less is cheering for al-Shara while also bringing in tough love and saying, you don't get this, you don't get that, what you need, unless you do this, that, and the other thing, and we monitor that, I think it'll be okay. I was really worried after I was involved to some degree with some of the people in the negotiations and the activities in January, which was pretty tumultuous between the Kurds and the central government and the Arab tribes along the Euphrates. But when the 29 January agreement was agreed to, and it was better for the Kurds, even though they'd lost a lot, than the 18 January agreement, I held my breath for a couple of weeks to see what would happen. The next thing I know, General Mazloum, the Kurdish leader, is in Munich at the security conference meeting Rubio, and more importantly, the Turks weren't complaining about it, and they're off making peace with the PKK. I think it's going to be okay. Long answer, but it's a very important question, and it's a very important issue.
Hi, I'm Maria Rini. I'm in Professor Gray's class for U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. So my question is regarding Turkey. Given your experience in Turkey, how did you navigate tensions between NATO allies such as Greece and Turkey within the context of the Cyprus problem, whilst also maintaining U.S. strategic regional interests with all the countries?
First, a question back. How's Gray as a professor?
Excellent.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah. She'll
Ver-
give you an honest answer
yeah,
after the.
yeah,
after
very, very delicately. I've been both a 4-time diplomat in Turkey, and I was a Greek desk officer. And I also, one of my first prominent roles in the Department of State was to figure out the issue of Greek Aegean island militarization, which was leading the Turks to claim all kinds of things and such. And so I prepared a legal brief, even though I'm not a lawyer, and the State Department accepted it, so it shifted its position a little bit. But we do this reluctantly. We value both countries. We know we cannot fix the underlying problems between Greece and Turkey. These things began at the Battle of Manzikert. Anybody know the year of Manzikert? I think 1077, but it was certainly in the 11th century. So it's been 1,000 years between the Byzantines and the Turks, first the Seljuks and then the Ottomans. And they have different approaches to things. Turkey has a huge foreign policy agenda, and it has all kinds of unfriendly relations with many of its neighbors and other things. It only has so much time to devote to Greece. Greeks have only one foreign policy problem because we take care of Russia, we being US and NATO, and the Greeks themselves on the margins. They only have one issue, which is Turkey. So you have a difference of balance. So you have to handle this very, very delicately. We try not to get into it. And they've actually been able to work it out pretty well among themselves for the past 20 years. We have, in the 80s, they were almost at the point of war several times. So it's calmer now. And it's a good question because our default position when we do have friction between allies is try to leap in and fix it. And we tried on Cyprus. We obviously tried with the Palestinians and the Israelis. We haven't had a great, our batting average is not good. So, and we're likely to mess it up rather than make it better. So we try to stay out of it. If it becomes a crisis, that's when it's too late. Then we start picking up the phone and calling people and trying to fix it. So what we do a lot is call people in the middle of the night and tell them to stop doing what they're doing or start doing what they promised to do and haven't done. This is a lot of diplomacy, believe me.
Thank you so much for coming, Ambassador. My name's Laura. I'm in Professor Gordon's class. And my question is about Syria again. Right now, currently, Turkey and Israel are both competing for influence over Syria. What is the United States' stance on that, given that they're both nominal partners?
That's a really good question because I'm going to contradict myself. I'm going to, in two ways. First of all, I'm going to contradict my answers to the last two questions. If one thing is going to screw up Syria and thus screw up the rosy scenario I've painted for the Middle East, it's going to be Israel and Turkey making a mistake in Syria. What you have is the last two remaining real regional powers in the Middle East. And they're among the few regional powers in the world. We talk about regional powers and BRICS and BRACs and all of this all of the time, but a Brazil, a South Africa, they're not really security and diplomatic players in any sense other than a bigger version of Mozambique or a bigger version of Uruguay. Turkey and Israel have classic foreign policy approaches that meld intelligence, security, military, diplomatic, trade, energy, just like the middle powers, say Austro-Hungary had before World War I, and they act the same way, and that's the problem. So they're the only two remaining regional powers in the Middle East, and they both had an almost unbroken series of military successes of late. Obviously, the Israelis with much effort in Gaza, but a great deal of success with Lebanon, not much with the Houthis, same with us, but that's to the side, and obviously against Iran, and in intimidating the Iraqi militias to stay out of the fight. The Israelis have done well, and the Turks have done well, you name it, with their pals, the Azeris in the Caucasus, in Libya, and obviously in Syria. And so both of them are kind of looking for problems. And they find it in the other because they have had a long-term positive relationship that fell apart. And again, the book goes into this in great detail around 2009, 2010 over Gaza. And then in Gaza having become a huge issue among populations around the world, including here, but certainly in the Muslim world. The Turks took a very harsh position, and Erdogan, nobody can be as harsh as Erdogan. And nobody can take offense as easily as Bibi Netanyahu. And I could reverse that. Nobody can be as harsh as Netanyahu, and nobody can take offense as easily as Erdogan. So you have the two leaders, and I know them both, and I had to deal with both of them back during Syria, where you could already see, even though they were kind of on our side, there were frictions between them, and it was very hard to get them to coordinate actions against Assad. And now it's much worse. It's under control because the U.S. is putting a whole lot of effort into it. And also, we're very lucky. I'm a fan of al-Shara. We're very lucky we have al-Shara, who is being reasonable with the Israelis. They're negotiating. On January 9th, there was a meeting in Paris where they didn't get a breakthrough, but the Israelis and the Syrians agreed to set up a joint coordination cell. And this has got being smothered by American diplomatic and military hands-on, because this is really important and only we can do it. So I'm contradicting this. We try to avoid these things. When it gets critical, as it almost did, the Israelis were bombing the hell out of everything, including a base around Palmyra where the Turks were beginning to set up air defenses. That's at that point when things really look bad. That's when Washington wakes up, as they said, all too late, and says, hey, we got to do something about this. And they're doing pretty well so far.
Okay.
This question comes from DeMark Schultz in the online audience. Ambassador Jeffrey alluded to the different dynamics in the current administration vis-a-vis who is chosen or who is granted the authority of expeditionary diplomat. Do you view the role of private actors like Witkoff and Kushner as a reflection of diminished trust in the State Department, either because of deep state concerns or bureaucratic capacity, or a move away from an era of expeditionary diplomacy writ large?
The folks, there were Foreign Service officers who were doing shuttle diplomacy for Ambassador Barak between Damascus and Mazlum and the Kurds up in the north. We're doing, expeditionary diplomacy at the very highest level. Same thing with the diplomats and the military personnel who are trying to work the details of the Israeli, Syrian, Turkish conundrum. And we've got diplomats and military, including the guy who ran the JSOC operation in Syria. Now, well, his name is now out there, Jasper Jeffers. Do you ever know Jasper? Anyway, he's the major general who's running the whole Gaza International Security Force. So you've got military and diplomats still being trusted by these guys. And I've seen Foreign Service officer after Foreign Service officer who I know who have been plucked by these folks to play roles. Here's what's good and here's what's bad. First of all, there is no bad envoy who has the president's ear. Because the most important thing any envoy can have, whether you're a business person, whether you're the son-in-law, or whether you're a diplomat, is, will the president listen to you and pay attention to you? That is the sine qua non. Second is, do you know what you're doing? And thirdly is, are you following the right policies? There is a whole set of things. So the fact that we have people doing these key accounts, and it's basically two in the field, Barak and Witkoff, well, three counting Jared Kushner, who have the president's ear is a very good thing. The fact that they turn to Foreign Service officers out of the State Department and the military and work very closely with them. A good example is our CENTCOM commander was involved in the last negotiations with Iran by Witkoff's side. We never did that in earlier negotiations on the nuclear count with Iran. That's a good sign that they respect the bureaucracy, in this case, military bureaucracy. or they respect people in it. What they don't have much time for is the bureaucracy qua bureaucracy, and the State Department is the big loser is USAID, but the State Department is also suffering from this. And there's two reasons. One is, look, they do think it is woke. I love the State Department. But the reception that Mike Pompeo got in the CIA was very different than the reception he got later in the State Department. And I knew him pretty well. He never could understand why these people, didn't want to, what was his term? You have to have, not moxie, but it was some obnoxious term that he said, swagger, yeah. Well, the CIA guys like swagger. The State Department guys don't like swagger. They didn't like swagger for the Trump administration. There were little bits of pushback, and they're very sensitive to that. But the more important reason is the bureaucracy doesn't work well. It cannot come to real, on the 90% of the work the State Department does, you need the bureaucracy because you have to, use the money given to you by Congress. You have to use it in the right way. That requires lawyers to look at it. You have to follow international law. You have to follow bureaucratic procedures. But for the 10% of creative stuff at the top, what do we do with Greece and Turkey if they do have a crisis? What do we do with Israel and Turkey if they have a crisis? The system cannot operate fast enough or creative enough. So every president relies on special envoys. I worked briefly but dramatically, that's also covered in the book, for Holbrooke on Bosnia. And talk about a president and a low-level State Department guy. Holbrooke at the time had left the Foreign Service, but he was a Foreign Service officer for a decade, a lot of time in the field in Vietnam, 6 years, had been the aide director in Morocco. So he had a good background as an FSO. He was assistant secretary. I was getting an interview in his office in 1995, and the phone rings, and he picks it up. It's the Situation Room. The president wants to talk to him. So I'm saying, why does the president want to talk to an assistant secretary? Well, it was about Bosnia, and he was Clinton's guy for Bosnia, period. Not Secretary Christopher, not the National Secretary Berger, the National Security Advisor. It was Dick. And then more interestingly, Dick was dating his future wife at the time in New York, and he was going to catch a flight. And he kept telling his staff, get on the White House and tell him to put Clinton on the line before I leave. And I'm sitting there watching this in horror saying, this guy isn't going to walk out on a call with the president. Yes, he walked out on a call with the president. And Clinton loved him all the more for it. So in the end, presidents develop these personal relationships with people that they trust. And you go through the bureaucracy. When you're the ambassador in the field and it's in a National Security Council meeting, you're kind of like the Wizard of Oz up on the screen with all kinds of opportunities to dictate to the audience, which includes the president and includes your boss, Secretary of State. But in a legal, technical sense, your only boss is the president, and ambassadors know how to exploit that. You have to be careful. I've gotten in trouble with the Secretary of State or the Deputy Secretary of State sometimes, and the things I've come up with in these meetings. But you have an enormous credibility if they want to give you that credibility. So any administration is going to pick the people that they trust, particularly the president trusts. And all I can say is, don't look at the weird things that this gang does, because they're really weird by normal standards. Look at the results. Look at Gaza, the ceasefire. Look at what they're trying to do in Ukraine, where they're getting increasingly good marks from Zelensky and the Europeans. Look what they're trying to do with Iran. And look what they've done in the Caucasus. So if they do screwy things and we wound up in trouble, and I was really worried about Iran, I'm less so today than yesterday, but they're capable of doing it like any administration. That's what the standard to hold them by, not the particular bureaucratic mechanism they use.
Ambassador, thank you. My name is Sina Azori. I'm a professor here. I do want to go back to the issue of Turkey and Syria. And I do want to bring in Israel here.
Mhm.
Recently, with the developments in the region, I'm looking at the Turkish media and speaking to my Turkish students. There is a concern in Turkey that they might be on the target list of the Israelis. And yesterday, Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, he said publicly that there is a growing threat emerging from Turkey. Now, the question is, do you think that Israelis are bent on a regional hegemony, which would mean that they would go after Turkey, and not necessarily in a military sense, but kind of, toppling Erdogan, bringing in more
Good luck.
a secular government? What is your take on that? Thank you.
It's a big issue. I'll focus mainly on the Israeli side of it because, in fact, in the last year, I've gone out to both countries because of this very concern. And I heard a lot of this, particularly from the Likud people in Israel. Henry Kissinger, in responding to critics of Henry Kissinger's containment theory, once said, in reference to the Soviet Union, because people were saying, look, the Soviet Union isn't really aggressive, they're just defensive. Look, they're ringed by American bases. Same thing the Iranians say. And Kissinger said, absolute security for one country means absolute insecurity for everybody else. No, I do not think that either. Boy, I spent half my time making the first set of arguments and half my time making the second set of arguments. Neither Israel nor Turkey is a wannabe regional hegemon in the sense that Iran wanted to be a regional hegemon. Jim Jeffrey thinks so. That's also disputed, but I'll stand by those words. It's a very different, but both countries have suffered a lot. The Turks being surrounded, they've got the Ukraine war to their north, the Caucasus up until very recently, they didn't know how that would go. And of course, to the south, they had Assad, they had the Russians in Syria, they had the PKK, they had the Islamic State, which did a lot of attacks inside Turkey. And they had a very unstable, controlled by Iran, Iraqi government. And their only allies in Iraq were the Kurds, which were problematic from their domestic standpoint. So the Turks had a lot of problems, and I don't need to describe all of the Israeli security problems they've had since 1948. So these are countries that really want to make sure that they got their security portfolio correct, and they now have the diplomatic, the economic, and the military means to do so. The problem is they are now rubbing against each other. Again, I just did a piece for a Caravan, which is the Stanford University Hoover School's, what is it? It's a quarterly. And I call it the Middle East 1919 moment, because we now have the winners of this 2-year conflict against Iran rubbing up against each other like we had in 1919. And we all know how that all turned out. It all turned out in another war 20 years later. So I'm worried about this. I think the U.S. is working well, and I think it's getting a bit better. The Turks, for once, they're not always this way, but for once they were very relaxed about the Israeli bombings and all of this. They've let al-Shara take the lead with Israel. Al-Shara has done a pretty good job, again, with a lot of coaching from Washington. And the Turks keep on sending positive signals. Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister, who's very highly regarded, including in Israel, he's one of these former intelligence guys, like, it was Qasem Soleimani, Yossi Cohen from the Mossad, and Hakan Fidan was Turkish intelligence that were kind of running the Middle East a decade ago. And he signaled that there could be a return to full relations. It will be hard with the two leaders, and it will be hard particularly because Israel is going into an election, and it's going to be very tense and very tight. But ultimately, both are status quo countries with a huge desire to ensure they're never in the security situation they found themselves in for much of the last 20 or 30 years, and with the diplomatic, military, and economic means to push people around. That's what I'm worried about. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Jeffrey, for coming. And I'm a student. My name is Humphrey. I'm a student from Professor Gray's class. And my question is regarding at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that 3 presidents you worked with have very different mindset when it comes to Middle East policies. So, from the perspective of a foreign service officer, can you expand on the specifics of how they view this region differently, just very briefly? Thank you.
George Bush 43 wanted to transform the region. He didn't enter office with that perspective, but after 9/11, he believed, and Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld encouraged him to believe that we should use our extraordinary military capability left over from the Cold War, with frankly, at that time, we're talking about 2001 here, no real enemies to, keep it busy, on transforming the Middle East. And he was a true believer that if these people had an option for democracy, they would embrace democracy. And Condoleezza Rice, then the National Security Advisor, later the Secretary of State, believe me, she believed in this even more than Bush. Now, that was unrealistic. And it was further complicated by the fact that Cheney and Rumsfeld didn't believe the same way. I cover this in the book a bit. They basically reminded me of Roman proconsuls, okay? You do what the Germans call a Strafexpedition. That is, you go in, you remember Colin Powell, who was in a 3rd position, didn't want us to go into Iraq at all and didn't buy too much into this whole democracy thing. He was a very savvy guy. Said, hey, it's like the pottery brand. You go in and break it, you own it. So, Mr. President, you're going to own Iraq. Cheney and Rumsfeld was, no. If the pottery bond gets uppity, you go in, you smash everything, and then you leave and you let the pottery bond figure out how to fix it themselves. And meanwhile, everybody will realize they don't mess with us. That was their view. So they didn't like keeping troops on to turn the place into Denmark. Bush did. Okay, that's Bush. And that didn't turn out well. But he changed his mind because of the dramatic events of 2006 in Iraq. And we responded with not only the surge, but Bush basically said, look, I'm out of here in 3 years, guys. We'll fight off the worst enemies to the new Iraqi state, but we're not going to try to transform you anymore. And the Iraqis liked that message. They said, yeah, kill our enemies or help us kill them, and then get the hell out of here because we see you as a colonial power. And that actually worked. So Iraq turned out, ironically, as more or less of a success. Afghanistan, we didn't get that. We really didn't get that through every president until Trump, although Obama was beginning to think that way. We didn't really understand that. And we kept on doing the same mistakes every year for many years with new leadership. Obama was the first president to realize we needed to pivot to Asia. But he kept on getting pulled back into the Middle East, be it the Arab Spring, be it the Islamic State, and be it, of course, the Iranian nuclear program. And as I said at the end, Kerry talked him into at least allowing Kerry to pursue Israeli-Palestinian peace. So it looks kind of, if you ticked off all the portfolios, it looked rather like presidents before and after. But Obama really believed in international law, the UN, and the rational basis for international relations, including with countries like Iran, which was his weakness. As I said, Bush's was believing they all wanted to be democracies. Trump and Biden actually, in their own different ways, have gotten it. They don't want to make the region democratic. You know, Biden came in saying, it's my foreign policy is all about democracies versus authoritarian states. And that lasted until his fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And frankly, I won't say we all, but a lot of us breathed a sigh of relief because we didn't much like the authoritarian versus democracy thing because it was a bit like Bush. And I thought Biden had a pretty good approach to the Middle East. Trump had a pretty good approach to the Middle East. It's debatable whether pulling out of the JCPOA was a good thing or a bad thing. You can argue it either way. But neither, while they both focused on the pivot as a principle, that if you woke them up in the middle of the night and said, what do we need to do in the world? Pivot to Asia. But what are you going to be doing tomorrow? Well, I got 4 meetings about crises in the Middle East. And they didn't walk away from the Middle East, which we who like the Middle East and work in it, we're happy with. So I would say you had 2 who tried transformational approaches in different ways, and 2 who basically took the region as it was and figured they had to do crisis management to keep it from blowing up. And that's worked out better. A very controversial position, by the way. I mean, you can ask 10 people and you get 15 opinions.
Can I invite someone from one of our guests from Kent State if you've got any questions? Not trying to put anyone on the spot, but I want you to feel welcome too. There's one. There we go.
Hello, I'm Zachary from Kent State, and I was wondering how you utilize, or you and a team utilize, other factors of national power. Not only we think of ambassador in the military space, but also cultural use, humanitarian aid, and other aspects, and economic aid. How do you use that to help stabilize these regions that are under immense stress?
That's a very good question. I will have a somewhat unconventional answer as a Foreign Service officer and need to ask other Foreign Service officers. I divide all elements of national power into 2 categories, hard power and soft power. People who do that normally put military in the hard power and everything else in the soft power. I don't. Hard power is what you use to influence states, which is the main job of diplomacy in foreign policy, is getting states to not do things you don't want them to do, or getting states to do things you want them to do, from liking us to, reducing their tariffs, or accepting our tariffs and negotiating deals, or stop bombing us, or stop bombing our friends, you name it. We have a long list of things we want people to do and not to do. And that begins with military power. Never forget clandestine and particularly covert operations, information operations, diplomacy both as a tool, that's how you get the messages to these people and what we want them to do, but also, as I said, as that overarching coordinating factor, so in 2 senses, and economics. The hard power aspects of economics are trade relations. If they're significant, they make a huge difference. Almost anything with energy, including manipulating U.S. energy companies and such. Energy is really strategic. Arms transfers, which half in the economic, half in the military basket. But also humanitarian, health, and other core developmental things when a country really needs it and wants it. When there's a natural disaster, an earthquake, and we're in there helping them, that's hard power. That builds you support with government, and frankly, you can leverage it. Well, we could move one of these Marine Expeditionary Forces who, it's 2,000 Marines who, while they normally exist to shoot, are really good with helping people and delivering supplies and patching folks up and such. But look, we have this issue with, your neighbor to the north, and it would be really nice for you to, make a few steps in that direction as the Marines are coming in. So we use that kind of thing too. And soft power is the idea of people to people. It stems from the ideological battle, which was real and dramatic. I served both in frontline NATO states in Vietnam in the Cold War, and I served in Bulgaria in the Cold War on the other side. The ideological struggle was real. Most of the populations in the East really didn't want to be dominated by the Soviet Union, didn't really like communism. And a big chunk of people in Europe, in South America in particular, but also in other former colonial areas, were enamored of, if not communism, of socialism, didn't like the capitalist colonialist West. So we had this huge ideological battle. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty were examples of it. Then in the Kennedy administration, we got into this hearts and minds. And it's a little bit like Kissinger's phrase that I used earlier on Iran. We were never quite sure, until very recently, whether we are a cause or a country. We're both. And the soft power comes to the cause side. I'm not much of a fan of the soft power. The best example is, because I worked much on it in the Bush White House, I can't think of a more generous humanitarian thing that we have done the last 30 years than PEPFAR. Saving tens of millions of people from AIDS death, having a huge impact on the whole health system of sub-Saharan Africa. And where was sub-Saharan Africa when Russia invaded Ukraine? They certainly weren't on our side. They sat on the sidelines. I'm not criticizing them for that. I'm criticizing people who make the argument we need to do soft power to reinforce our hard power, to reinforce our security position, to reinforce our basic goals. No. You do PEPFAR because doing PEPFAR is in and of itself good, not because it's going to allow us, as I said, hey, would you please go talk to the country to your north and take a different policy towards them, because we didn't get that kind of feedback, and we don't get that kind of feedback from hearts and minds. So therefore, I was rather skeptical of it. But as a State Department officer, I was told to go out and do it. I refused to do tweets and texts and social media. And I mean, some of my ambassadorial colleagues, and we know who they are, maybe Gordon's one of them, who had thousands of followers, and they would tweet out what they were having for breakfast. I just didn't see my role as a personal, you're a representative of the state to the people who are the representatives of the state there, and you have to, it's what we do, try to explain what you're doing to a broader group than just the 5 guys and girls who are important around the president or the prime minister of the country. So you do have to do that, and that gets a little bit into soft power, but I'm not a big fan of soft power as anything more than a complement to what really counts, which is hard power. But as I said, I've defined hard power, I think, in such a cheatingly broad way that almost any policy I can throw into the hard power category and kowtow to it.
For the record, I did not tweet as ambassador, and nor would I ever imagine that anyone's interested in what I had for breakfast. But there are colleagues of ours who follow different practices.
Usually not in the Middle East, gang. We're a much harder, tougher, desert burned group of people.
Adam?
Hi, sir. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Madeline Schultz. I'm also one of Professor Gray's students. You mentioned that you're less concerned today about the state of U.S. relations with Iran than you were yesterday. Would you be able to elaborate on that, particularly in the likelihood of going to war?
Yeah, I think, well, as I said, my experiences with President Trump were that he is more outside the box and more unpredictable than other presidents. I find it hard to imagine in his opportunity to speak to the American people after he has amassed this armada, he's not going to mention that maybe he's going to send that armada and the other troops in the region into a very dangerous situation. And trust me, this one, we've all crunched the numbers. We've all looked at the weapon systems. We've all looked at Iran, prior experiences with Iran. We would have a lot of people in danger. We would take a lot of casualties. I don't think if he was planning on doing that, he would have just glazed over it, and then 3 days from now, we're rocking and rolling all up and down the Gulf with Iran. I could be wrong with this guy, but I've been pretty good predicting him, and that was my job in the first administration. Even when he said, we're going to withdraw troops, I was out there working to try to persuade him and the people around him otherwise, because I knew that in the end, if you can get the right arguments to him, and I spend great effort explaining that in my book, because my role in all of that has been much questioned. So I think that, and I know some of the people around him, and I've talked to, I'll just say I've had conversations, and I know they are not enthusiastic about, with a 39% popularity rating getting us into a war, which is, if there's one thing his base does not want, it's a war. And he's already running what I would call a traditional classic American collective security policy with all kinds of Greenland and, Gulf of America things to the base to kind of give them something and get their eyes to turn away from the fact that we've got troops in most of the places, essentially all the places we had troops 20 or 10 years ago. So I think that we're in a better position today, but it's Trump. Don't take that to the bank.
Hi, I'm Amit Yarom. I'm a grad student here at the Elliott School and a student of Professor Gray. And I'll continue with the previous line of Israeli-related questions. What do you think about the future of the Abraham Accords?
They're in that foreign policy category of maybe the third circle of hell that Gordon and I know, where it's still American policy and we give lip service to it. And when we're writing speeches for our bosses on the Middle East, it would be bullet point, maybe somewhere between 3 and 7. But I don't see the same juice to it for several reasons. One, the whole purpose, what was the Abraham Accords all about? To be sure, specifically to have better relations between Israel and Arab states. While there were economic, energy, and other benefits to that in both directions, and pretty significant, the main purpose was to have a more united front against the very serious Iranian and Iranian proxy reach in the region. But that situation has changed dramatically. And in changing, it has upset things in the region, whereas the Gulf states worry as much, particularly after the bombing of Qatar by Israel, In fact, the Arab states much more are concerned about a hegemonic Israel than Turkey is. It's not just that Turkey assesses Israel differently, it's also Turkey has a really big army and has really had a lot of military successes. The Arab states are not in that same position, so they worry more about Israel. So that's a problem. The other thing, to get back to my 1919 scenario, we have a real problem. It used to be between all the Gulf states and Qatar. Now it is between the Emiratis and the Saudis. The Emiratis are Israel's best friend. The Saudis are cooling. And of course, the big prize of the Abraham Accords is to get the Saudis on board. We were close to that on the day, 7 October, that 2023, that the fighting began. So I would say people will advance it, but they're really focused on Iran. They're in the nuclear negotiations and the Armada. They're really focused on Gaza in phase 2, which is lurching forward, but it has a lot of problems. And they're focused on the Syrian conundrum. And that doesn't leave a lot of, as we say, bandwidth for the Abraham Accords. But we'll see. They haven't gone away, and they can be resurrected.
And in the back there.
Hello, Ambassador. I have a question. I'm a student, Henry, here at Elliott. You've obviously worked in the FSO, the NSC, and as a special envoy. If you could talk about the difference each has seen with the region at the different levels of work.
As an FSO, your primary focus, other than your day job, which can be issuing visas, Gordon and I were talking, we both worked as what are called general services officers, worrying about things. And believe me, people worry about them, of the curtains in their houses. And if you can't keep people happy with things like this, then they're not going to do a good job. So there's lots of things you do that fall under the level of real diplomacy, but it takes up a lot of our time. But your focus is, to a dramatic degree, and Gordon, you should speak to this as well, on learning about the country, its history, its culture, working on your language skills. You're obsessed, and frankly, it's a highly competitive business among your peers. You all want to have more contacts. You all want to have better level contacts. You all want to speak the language better. You all want to travel to different areas and be more of an area and regional expert. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. So that's your main focus beyond your day job. And you're obsessive about it, or you shouldn't be in the Foreign Service. And the ones who aren't obsessive about it, we usually weed them out. In the NSC, it's a weird animal. It has several different functions, including competing with State Department to be that overall coordinator above DIME. but also it's the president's foreign policy staff. And at the end of the day, the default position is to serve the president, serve him his daily reports, get into the Oval Office, get his decisions. This may sound mundane, but believe me, it was like, a wonder in the National Security Council. Record all of his decisions that he does verbally. We weren't doing this, but I was in the National Security Council. I came up with one day and I said, look, we need a little chart that we can access on the classified computer and everybody can enter, because Bush would, like any other president, would throw off these decisions to, Tommy or Betsy or, Jill, whoever wandered into the Oval Office. And as we know from the Clinton administration, it's pretty easy to wander into the Oval Office. You don't have to have all kinds of special badges. And these people would get orders, go off and call somebody, and we would never know about it. So so it's staffing the president. As a special envoy, you're focused on obsessively on, do you have the right approach? Because everybody in the US government has handed this portfolio, in this case, Syria, to you. And you're constantly saying, am I advocating the right policy? And if yes, am I doing a good job advocating it to them? And then you're focused on coordinating with all of the other actors. I mean, I was one of United Airlines' favorite people in my 70s. I did so much travel to the Middle East and Europe because I had about 15 belly buttons I had to push. And if the belly button hadn't been pushed in the last 30 days, the belly button would start doing bad things or wrong things or things so you're constantly going around. And that's one of the benefits of being an American diplomat, because you have, you can summon aircraft carriers, you can do all kinds of important things. You can get your president to, invite their leader to a White House dinner and such. So you have these tools, and you're trying desperately to put them all together. But I'm making this sound like more work than it is. It's the most fun thing in the world. Of all the things I've done, that's the best, okay?
We have time for one more question. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Christopher, and I'm studying security policy here. I'm curious to know about your assessment of the threat from the Houthi group in the coming years in light of the recent degrading strikes on them and their supply lines, and if they're able to maybe reconstitute some of these supply lines, including with non-state actors like Al-Shabaab. Thank you.
For starters, they're going to be a real problem for the people of Yemen, as they've been for some time. They're not the only problem for the people of Yemen. You've got Al-Qaeda there, you've got ISIS there, you've got some bad actors in the official government and the Emirati, or up to very recently, the Emirati pseudo enclave in the south. So it's kind of a mess, and they're adding to the mess. Absent the Iranian proxy network in good health, the ability of the Houthis to play a major destabilizing role in the region as a whole, you notice I'm being cautious saying this because I could be proven wrong, I think is limited. The reason I say it's limited is if they really, really want to, they can make a mess out of the Red Sea, which is important, as we've seen, and they can make a mess out of Saudi Arabia, which is also extremely important for the region. So I worry a bit about that. It's just that, A, they won't be doing that because the Iranians need a southern front because they're not doing well on the northern front, which was the case over the past few years. And they won't have the Iranian support. But they're capable of causing, never underestimate the capability of some non-state Middle Eastern actor to discombobulate the entire Middle East, be it Al-Qaeda, be it the PKK, be it the IRGC, or be it the Houthis. So I think it's a contained problem now because its big brother, for the moment, has got other problems. But if the big brother comes back, and I wouldn't rule that out, I think it's unlikely, but big brother could come back, Iran, or if the Houthis on their own simply decide that it is their destiny to, you know, they're going to replace Iran as the next hegemon of the Middle East. Unlike Iran, they won't have a snowball's chance in hell of doing it, but they will have more than a snowball's chance in hell of messing up the whole region. So I'll give them credit for that. Watch it. Watch that spot.
Jim, thank you so much for a great
Okay.
talk.
Gordon? And thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.